Yo, how's it going, everybody? It's the Masked Man, and this is going to be interesting because I haven't really done a discussion video like this in a while, and it's been a long time since we've done a video together. But before we get into anything, I'd like to introduce a very special guest, and that's my longtime pal, Broken Ronin.
Yo, what's up? What's up? It feels brand new over here, man. It's been a while. I'm happy to be over here to talk about some Peak for real.
Yep. Nah, it's been, this is how long it's been. We did videos talking about and planning for when JJK Hell's Paradise, but specifically also like Chainsaw Man was going to get an anime. And now they're all here.
Yeah,
and bro, I didn't cap. Everyone was talking about Chainsaw Man. I did not capitalize it at all. I did not. But it's been a while. So I guess to sort of get into the topic or the idea of the video is sort of discussing the best casts in really shonen, really. Just because, you know, there's a lot of seinen series we could get into, but to sort of keep it within the parameters of shonen series. And I think there's a lot of examples people can bring up. I think two of the predominant ones, I know one that you would definitely bring up would be like Jujutsu Kaisen,
sure.
Given the cast of characters that it has, be it with Yuji, Sukuna, Gojo, Geto. I think Maki's been a tremendous character.
For sure. 100%.
I love Yuta's my personal favorite. As well as some of the other characters that have been introduced that I can't really. Well, you could probably. Oh, Megami. How'd I almost forget? It's almost like he's about to die. But
you're hurting my feelings. Stop it.
But I think that would probably be one of the examples that most people would point to.
Yeah, it's definitely. I mean, one of the more popular series out at the moment right now. So. And that's kind of what I'm known for at this point. So JJK is an interesting one. And I think it's one that, I mean, has a pretty good argument for at least like ongoing manga right now. It does have a really solid cast all around. I mean, I would say some of the top 10 or like the top 15 or whatever top amount of characters you have are all good. I mean, you have Toji, Gojo, like you said. You got characters like Choso, like some more like Shibuya. Yeah, Mahito is a really good character, and I think he's a really good foil for Yuji there. And then even in the culling games, you have new characters: Higuruma, Ishigori, Kashimo, etc., etc. So like, I think you can argue that JJK does have like a really, really, really good cast. The only thing you can kind of critique, in my mind, about it is just maybe sometimes you think characters aren't used to the fullest extent that they could, and that's not a JJK specific criticism. That's something I've noticed people have problems with in a lot of manga in general. That sometimes characters are hyped up, but then they underperform what the expectations are. And sometimes those expectations are unfair, but oftentimes I do feel like an author does set something up and isn't able to capitalize completely. Right.
I think a series that I think gets that a ton would be Naruto. And it does bring up an interesting discussion where it's like, do people want more out of a side character than they really should? Right? Where it's like, yes, you love this moment for this character, but is it really the author left some sort of plot line with the character unfinished, or was it simply they were a side character that had their moment, but yet now the main narrative needs to continue? That needs to be given light. At the end of the day, 100%. The protagonist and everything surrounding the protagonist is central. That should always be the priority. But I think you could definitely point to, it's not a one-shoe-fits-all thing, but you could definitely point to examples, right? Even though we're not talking about Naruto, but I think Rock Lee is one of the characters that most often gets point to feeling rather unused and unsatisfactory by the end of the series versus someone like Gaara, who served the role of pretty much primary antagonist within an arc, and then we got to see his character really reach this beautiful sort of whole turn by the end of Naruto. So, but JJK, I could definitely see that being a thing that's brought up pretty often.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, alongside JJK, I think Chainsaw Man is kind of compared. They have similar calibers of quality, in my opinion, and they also have this like weird, almost intangible set of similarities that lead a lot of Chainsaw Mans to being fan of JJK and vice versa. I don't know if you kind of want to touch on Chainsaw Man's cast and how good that is, because I do think it has a pretty solid cast all around too.
No, yeah, we definitely can. I think what allows Fujimoto to really stand out a lot as an author, and me and Alex were actually talking about this, bro. Me and this dude were in like a 6-hour call, and he had me up till 4 a.m. Alex, if you're hearing this, you messed up my sleep schedule for 2 days, but it's cool. But it's sort of, and he said this beautifully, is like Fujimoto's work is him. Like, and you see it throughout all of his characters. Like, he's willing to add these very weird things to his characters that allowed him to stand out, but that's not all there is to the characters, right? Denji would be a great example, right? And then obviously Makima, Himeno, Aki, even Power to a certain extent, Rize as an antagonist. You know, those are characters you could all point to. And then part two already with Asa, and I'm forgetting her name, but it was pretty much Asa's close friend for a decent portion of the story. But, you know, Fujimoto, you can't have anything happy for long. But I think Fujimoto's ability to really establish a character and make you feel invested in them in such a short amount of time, considering how fast-paced of a narrative something like Chainsaw Man is what allows a large majority of his characters to stand out and his cast to really stick with the reader.
For sure.
So I think that's something that for sure Chainsaw Man has to a strength. So I think Chainsaw Man, it's very interesting because it is linked often with JJK, as well as it's, you know, before we get into this, but it's also linked with another series, which is going to be the primary topic of this video.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that I think the series we are about to talk about does maybe a little bit better than Chainsaw Man and JJK is it keeps its cast relatively short or like relatively small, and that allows it to give entire chapters or entire fights to every character, even like relatively minor ones and supporting ones. And it's not that it has more characters overall that are good than JJK and Chainsaw Man, because Chainsaw Man and JJK may just by sheer like quantity have more quote unquote good characters. But with this series, it's more of like a pound for pound thing. There are very few series that I think have this like percentage of quality of characters. And I don't know if you wanted to introduce it, get into it. It's going to be kind of relevant for the rest of this season of anime. And yeah, it's something that I definitely look forward to seeing animated just because of how good the characters are on average.
I know, for sure. I mean, well, those seeing the thumbnail might be able to guess, but we are talking about Hell's Paradise, sort of the third of what's considered this dark new trio. But I think the whole pound for pound thing that you brought up was really interesting because I think it would be accurate, and I think it's not really a coincidence. And I'll sort of give a bit of an example, right? One Piece, something that I read recently. One Piece does have very good moments within its characters, but I think One Piece isn't able to fully get into its characters as much as other series do because it's what's known as a plot-driven story. There's so many moving parts and elements that the story takes focus on that it doesn't really leave room for the characters to be explored nearly as deeply as other series that have much simpler plots, but they're character-driven plots. And I think Hell's Paradise sort of has that from the jump. The plot of Hell's Paradise is pretty simple. Go to an island, retrieve this elixir, and you get pardoned from your crimes. That's the plot.
Yep.
Very simple, very straightforward. So what that allows is this focus isn't on the turns, on the mystery, on this and that, although not to say that character-driven stories can't have plot-driven elements or vice versa. But like you said, part of it having a smaller cast, but also just a very simple plot, allows from the jump, from the very first chapter, for the story to fully focus in on the characters' wants, needs, and that all starts with Gabimaru.
Yeah. 100%. I mean, what could be said about Gabimaru that I feel like every Hell's Paradise fan does not already feel? I mean, this guy is he's just cool, right? And I mean, he's cool from the jump. And I feel like in the first chapter and first episode of Hell's Paradise, you already get like a very small inkling of what the overarching theme and idea of the series is going to be. And it's actually something that I plan on talking about. Maybe it'll align closely to when this video comes out. But that idea of like vulnerability and weakness directly tying into strength, and even in fact being a kind of strength, that's something we see for Gabimaru. Like initially he's this character that, you know, I don't care if I die, it doesn't matter, you know, like I betrayed my ninja clan for no reason, I was tired of the like this married life, right? And he kind of, when he goes up against Sagiri, another one of the greatest characters in this series overall, we kind of see that he is stripped away of all of those like lies and like in misconceptions about himself, that he's hollow or that he's empty or that he's emotionless, and we get to see that facade completely torn down, and it's like the truth is shown. he loves his wife, and that is the reason he's been resisting all of these methods of like getting rid of him, killing him, execution, all of these different things. And it's because whether he was able to like acknowledge that consciously or not, he has a reason to live, and that reason to live is something that, based on his upbringing, would be considered weak. It would be considered pitiful even, but it's something that we're going to see throughout this series continuously gives him a level of strength, determination, and willpower that he would not be able to have just based on his ninja training.
Yeah. Not pretty much. Like yeah. I don't really know what I could go off of that. Like, you pretty much like nailed it, and that sort of common theme is even bigger with Sagiri. I feel like, regarding weakness actually being strength, and or well, perceived weakness really. But I really do love that element of Gabimaru, just because, although two different characters, but there is an element of, for example, like Ulquiorra, right, where his character is this hollow, emotionless, completely apathetic, and he kind of is learning and understanding the human art, versus Gabimaru, who, he is human. He has those desires, ones that have been completely pushed away, and so I kind of like this instant subversion of expectations. I actually like did a video recently talking about, my opinion, the best character in recent shonen, and my pick personally is Gabimaru. And all I had to really do was pretty much get into that first chapter for a good majority of the video, because right there his character's laid out, and it doesn't really change for the rest of the series, but if not, that's built off of. And I think Hell's Paradise sort of doing such a great job of giving us the picture with Gabimaru and what the story's going to do for the rest of it, that it allows a good amount of time to be focused on all of these other characters, which I don't know which one we kind of want to get into next, although I feel like the next one is kind of obvious, getting into her, right? Sagiri.
Yeah. Sagiri is such a cool character, such a refreshing look at a hot button topic, I guess, of the like female cast in shonen manga.
Right.
Right. I mean, it is just really refreshing to see a character of her caliber. Period. Really, like, honestly, it's to the point where I'm like, Sagiri, I think the reason people gravitate towards Sagiri so much is because it's not just, oh, you're good compared to like subpar, bad written characters and like other shonen or something like nobody's comparing Sagiri to Tenten or something, right? We compare Sagiri to Gabimaru because her writing quality stacks up neck and neck with that. Like, if someone comes up to me and they say, I like Sagiri as a character war, I'm like, I don't even bat an eye. That makes sense. That's just a take. That's cool. I may disagree, but it's such a close race between the two where it's like, oh no, Sagiri is just an amazing character. Duh. And you kind of mentioned her path to strength and realizing that weakness is very integral in that. And there's this term that she used when she's like, and one of her epiphanies in relation to that like the extremes of strength and weakness are both kind of useless to the goal that she has, right?
The middle.
Exactly. The middle way is actually exactly what she says, and that's a Buddhist concept that basically just illustrates the same thing that is shown in the series, right? Being overly hardened and tough and not letting yourself feel any emotions or vulnerability leads you to be stiff and unable to adapt, change, or evolve, right? And being too soft or like not strong enough to have resolve or resist any forces that come your way leave you unable to move anywhere of your own choosing, right? And it's when you accept both of these things as not only okay but necessary, when you understand that vulnerability is part of being strong. Like, you have to be a strong person to be able to be vulnerable, and that literally ties into not only their characters but the actual power system of the series, and that's just spectacular to me.
I think that was really well done. I think her whole growth as a character, as well as her personality, really bounces off really well with some of the more, crazy nuts in the group. And I think seeing her go through that is great. And like you said, it's refreshing because I've been thinking about this topic a lot, and it's not something I really wanted to dedicate an entire video to, because there are, for example, there's the whole shoujo demographic out there, right? There are a lot of series that instead of just making a character, I've always said there's like a difference between a romantic interest and a relationship. Those are two very different writings, and it's very different having a female character versus a female character.
Yeah.
Like what clearly matters is this is a character that was well thought out with beginning to end. They're not just there for, be it fan service or anything like that, which occasional fan service within a series, I don't really care, but whenever it gets to the point where it breaks the immersion within a story, I can't speak, then I'm like, ugh. But with Sagiri, that's not the case. She's simply there as a really well done character who's given time to grow. And like you said, although obviously my pick would be Gabimaru, it's the amount of time the series gives to showing her own conflict, one that we wouldn't have ever really guessed being there from the very first chapter, right? It's more so once the story gets into things that we really get to get her side of things and her perspective. And I think that whole message of balance was absolutely beautiful for a character like herself.
Yeah.
I think someone on the opposite spectrum of personality, though, would be Aza. Aza Chobe, who I think, I know the main thing when everyone looked at him, I did it too, when you're still learning the characters' names, is so Bakugo. He's not Bakugo. It's not even close. It's not
even close. And
they might look close, but that's about it.
Yeah, Aza's such a cool character, and the way he fits into Aza's like ideals and the sort of like things that he thinks are just so interesting to me. I mean, he's not my favorite character, but I'm not gonna lie, I felt a little bit of like I almost betrayed Gabimaru when he said, I'm my own god. I was like, hold on, that's a bar. That's kind of crazy.
Right.
And it's interesting, right? Because his backstory and his brother's backstory inform their current ideologies, just like a normal person would, right? Like your past tends to inform your future in the way you act in the present. And the fact that he had to realize that adaptation and growth and evolution are the only ways to survive.
Right.
And he takes that to its logical extreme where, immediately he's entering a new place. He's determining if the water is drinkable. He's determining if he can eat the actual creatures they're fighting. And he's making these determinations at a quicker rate than a trained ninja like Gabimaru and someone like Sagiri, who is obviously on par with Gabimaru at the start of the series. And I think it shows a lot, like a saying that he says a lot is break down, come apart, right?
Yeah.
And that I like that idea because it shows that evolution is not only just growing upwards or horizontally, right? A lot of the times, to evolve, you have to destroy yourself and rebuild something completely different.
Right. Take a step back to take two forward, sort of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, I think that part of I definitely think in terms of a character, he isn't, I think, internally explored nearly as much as Sagiri or Gabimaru. I think his backstory sort of lays out. It's more so his actions, right, that really determine the character. But I really think a character like him is extremely important in this sort of story because you get Gabimaru and Sagiri, whose personalities are relatively straightforward, right? The misdirection with Gabimaru is instantly thrown to the side within that first chapter. And yet Aza, every time he was present within the story, he caught your attention because everything he did was just sort of like, like what is he capable of? And I think his relationship with his brother was really well done. And I also think it was a good choice on the story to sort of allow both of them to grow without each other, to sort of have that kind of separate growth within the story, thus allowing them to really implement themselves more. But Aza, especially what he ends up doing with the enemies, pretty much, right? Lord Tenzin and all that was it's going to be very interesting to see them sort of adapt that scene. Because that's some of the weird stuff within stories that sometimes allows them to be a little more memorable. And I think Aza's a really good example of that. Like just this pure, again, we're talking about a story where these are criminals on death row being sent to an island, and none of them are as nuts as this guy. He is the nut. Like he's no. This guy's in, like you said, I'm God.
Bro is
Kanye.
He's crazy.
He's Kanye.
He's kind of going off the deep end, and it's interesting because like that adaptation trait that he has. Like, all of these characters have unique traits about them that allow them to survive. Like, Gabimaru, it's his natural skill and hardened ability, right? He is the extreme of physical strength and your typical mental toughness, right? The reason he's able to survive here so long is simply put because he's him, right?
Yeah.
He's just that guy in terms of physicality, right? Nobody in the series and that specific category I think is really better than him. Sagiri is able to stay like within the series because she acknowledges her own weakness, and I think it's by chapter 2 we're going to see that by looking at Gabimaru's actions, she's able to sort of somewhat start the path of reconciling the two between strength and weakness. And with Aza, his thing is he has absolutely no issue deconstructing himself and his preconceived notions, his morality, his ideology. All of those things are they're subject to change. He's willing to completely reinvent himself every single fight, every single situation that he's in. And because of that, he's one of the first people to actually come up upon the power system and like awaken it in a way that we don't see other characters do until significantly later in the story.
Right. Yeah. I think despite his insane personality, I think sort of that reality of sometimes in harsh environments, harsh circumstances, and this is a bit of a relatable factor, is when you put a person within an extremely harsh environment, sometimes they need to absolutely destroy everything about themselves to grow. You need to weed things out, right? And not everybody's capable of making it through that process. And it was sort of this extreme example of seeing how people change. But to sort of move on to another character, because Aza's raw, but we get, there's a lot of other characters to get into. My personal, I'd say probably my second favorite character in the series, the blind man, Shion. I think
Shion's cool.
Yeah, I think Shion, with me, I personally felt at first when he was introduced, I've sort of seen like this whole calm, cool, collected mentor character. I was like, okay, him being blind is cool, right? And I mean, we recently saw John Wick, and the blind guy in that movie was crazy, but not to go on that tangent. But I think what Shion originally was presented as, even though he was impressive, I think what he ended up being by the end of sort of his character within the story, I found to be so hard to like not love, just emotionally. Like you become so attached to this character, especially once he sort of realized it's sort of like the relationship that grows with Tenza, right? And sort of looking at his own life and everything regarding that. Like I think he was extremely interesting despite his more laid back personality, just because, you know, everything with his backstory and realizing he didn't really owe his life to anybody. And I think he was such a crucial part to how much I love the cast. Again, he's my personal second favorite throughout the entire story. I think seeing the way that his character was shown throughout, and the fact that Hell's Paradise did such a good job of choosing when to give these character moments was huge. And I think Shion's a great example of Hell's Paradise knowing exactly when to choose its moments.
Yeah, Shion's such a cool character. Like you said, like the blind but can still see trope hits damn near every time. I'm gonna be real.
Yeah.
It's very rare that I see something like that and I'm like, that's kind of boring. And Shion is not really an exception. I won't get too deep into like intricacies, but I like the way he kind of evolves from the character that we see to be very, very calm, very, very collected, like you said. And we see that after a certain incident happens, it's kind of on the nose, right? But I think it still works anyway. But he's literally blinded by his rage and desire for revenge, to the point where like he is beside himself, right? Yeah. And obviously, it's not like oh my god, the blind person is literally blinded by. It's like, okay, cool, surface level idea, but I think the execution of it is really well handled in the within the context of the story, and I really liked seeing that transition of that, and just seeing that slow. It's not like he's the main character, but on the side of the story, as everything else is going absolutely insane, he's on the side slowly becoming beside himself with like his desire for vengeance and his overwhelming anger. And I think that was a very interesting thing about him.
No, yeah, for sure. I think his his sort of it's his dynamic with the group as well. Like, I love the way that all these characters eventually started to meet each other, and I think the way that he started to view Gabimaru more as the story went on, I thought was like super like really well done. I loved his fighting style throughout the series as well. He definitely seemed like one of the more strategic characters. Of course, being blind would have to, you're probably gonna have to be a little more diligent than others.
Yeah.
But it was sort of interesting seeing, because I'm so used to seeing angry to a little more calm and stoic, learning to put aside your rage, but sort of seeing the opposite of that for once, I thought was again just really refreshing to me with the cast of Hell's Paradise. What's the next character we want to get into? There's a good amount that we can.
Gantetsusai is, I think, as good as any. I think he's a pretty cool character. For him, his main claim to fame is just his boisterous personality. This guy fills up a room, one, because he's just huge, but two, because he is going to let you know that he's there. He's loud. He's very, very, very proud of his abilities. And he just has the type of personality that is like, it would probably be annoying in real life. I'm not going to lie to you. But in a manga where I don't got to deal with that, it's kind of fun. It's kind of fun to see. And like you said, I think a lot of where I like him comes from his interaction with other characters.
Right.
I think that's super interesting. And it's a little bit of an interesting concept because he mentions in the story at some point that he does what he does because he wants to be immortal, right? And not like he wants to drink the elixir of immortality that, everybody's vying for, but he wants to be remembered. He wants to pull off like one feat, one work that will get him remembered as like a swordsman in that's heavenly in terms of skill, right? He wants to be remembered for something big. And because of that, he's big. He takes up the room. He makes sure that his personality is known and heard. But we see very later in the story, towards the end game, and it's not a full-on backstory. It's more of like a flashback. But it's like he realizes that, similar to Aza, sometimes you have to cut down in order to realize the finer details.
Yeah, I think he was one of those characters that, like you said, his personality is what stands out, but he was one of the ones that I was less high on at first, just because I wasn't really sure, like, okay, was this story really going to do anything with his character that I really enjoyed? But yet, once Fuchi's, spoilers, by the way, but once a specific thing happens to Fuchi, right, which rhymes with meth, you get to see his personality change a little bit, and like you said, it was just sort of a bit of that flashback near the end with his final battle that I think really, I think this story just did a really good job with giving characters, because oftentimes, like, you get a character who's introduced really strongly at the beginning, but their end point, there isn't a period at the sentence to make you go, yep, it's done. This is good. This is yep, the exclamation point that I need. Hell's Paradise didn't have that. It did it great with Shion, and it did it great with Gantetsusai. I can't pronounce his name at all, but I'll just
Gantetsusai.
Yeah, Gantetsusai. Go. Yeah, like it did a great job specifically with his character and making you feel invested at the very end. And for a series to do that with its more minor characters, right, not just with Gabimaru, Sagiri, them being in the forefront, I thought was really well done. A character that I think a lot of people want to see us talk about, but probably not for the right reasons, is Yuzuriha.
Yeah, bro. Listen, all you guys, calm down. I know you got excited. Relax, chill. I understand. I get it. But she's also a dope character. I like her character a lot.
Right.
I think so. Her personality, like there's something to be said about fan service, right? And we talked about this a little bit earlier. But fan service is like, we don't. It's not that it conceptually is bad, but a lot of the times it is used as a crutch for like actual character writing.
Right.
But with Yuzuriha, it seems like it's the opposite. Like, if that is a tool to explain or further like extrapolate on her character more, right? As like a kunoichi, that's a very integral part. Like seduction is a very integral part of like how they fight.
Right.
And I think it's interesting that it's really engaging because she's actually one of the more like slippery. No, Jesus. I realized that literally played into like her power set, and I was like, I did not mean to make that pun.
Yeah.
But she's one of the more like elusive people in terms of like nailing who she is
Right,
and
being
what her
honest.
motivations are.
Right,
Because
right.
she like immediately, Gabimaru asks, what's going on here? Oh yeah, she lies, quote unquote, right? And we're led to believe that she's this super shallow, super like not care about anybody. I put me number one.
Right.
And she is initially, right? Like that's who she is. But we see over the time of the story, she is forced time and time and time again to be in life and death situations with these people. And she kind of becomes a bit more of a selfless person.
Right.
She's not some saint by any means at the end of the story, but it's that evolution in the most subtle of moments that we get to see who she really is. And honestly, I think one of her endings is one of the best among the supporting cast, because we as the viewers can't like at the last kind of like major moment she has, it's like, oh my God, there was a point in the story where I was led to believe one thing and I was just completely wrong. And it just, you just think back and it recontextualizes everything
scene,
she
every
says,
dialogue,
every sentence, every single bit of the series where I'm like, oh, she's this, she's that. And it's like, oh no, wow, the seed was already there. She just needed the proper care to let it grow and flourish.
Nah, for sure. I think her personality, again, because you have Aza, you have Gantetsusai, and you have her, who I think their personalities just do really well against characters like Shion, and specifically her dynamic with Sagiri and Gabimaru. I posted it like yesterday, where she's trying to seduce him and Gabimaru's like, nah, I'm married, nice try, you for the streets. But I think her personality allowed her to, at first, as you were kind of getting into the fan service, I'm trying to like really, because I have my points, I'm just trying to structure them on the fly, which is crazy. But, at first you get this presentation of her character, which is the surface level, right? And at first she can just really seem like the only reason you care for her is her very fun personality and sort of fan servicey nature, right? But as the story goes on, like you said, it completely gets recontextualized, especially the scene where her scars are shown all over her body. And she talks about how she, whether living or dying, she goes at it alone. She's always gone at it alone. And it really puts this character in a whole new perspective for you, and I think without question, she remains easily one of the, like you said, it's this character who at first comes off as very selfish, very shallow, and yet in the end is selfless. And
it's
beautiful.
And it's such a good arc. And the thing is like she's not Gabimaru, she's not Sagiri, she's not the main antagonist in terms of importance, but she's just handled really well. And that's something that you're going to notice. We keep harping on all of these characters are introduced well and they exit the series well, right?
Right.
It's just something, I mean, and then in the middle, they're interacting with each other and you're seeing the growth. And it's part of the reason, I mean, a lot of it is just, I think I want to hammer this point home. The reason I think this is able to be done is because, like Matt said, the plot is simple and the character list is small.
Yeah.
There are not that many people that we see from the start of the series, just period, actually. Like end of sentence. There's not that many characters that are named, right, at the start of the series that lasts with us to the end of the series. And everybody that does is a at least good character. With on the higher ends, you have like Gabimaru and Sagiri being like excellent characters in my mind, right?
Right.
So it's something that's really interesting and it's really impressive. Like I like round of applause to Yuji Kaku for pulling this off, because you just have this collection of characters that are just it's so consistent. It's the consistency more than anything that really impresses me as a reader and future viewer of the anime, right? It's just such a feat to be able to focus on a set of characters and not miss with any of them.
Yeah, and I think a good amount of this could also be due to just having a great antagonistic force that allow the focus to be on our protagonistic side's growth, if that makes sense. Like, conflict is what pushes your characters, and he put them in a setting where conflict is constant and in many different ways. And I think obviously there's elements of symbolism, right, regarding the whole Lord Tenzin thing and Tao that I clearly know nothing about, right? But I do think they were, like, everything that happened, for example, with Aza, right, with Gabimaru, with it allowed, it was this versatility, right, considering that it's sort of a group, right? It's not just one entity, but it's a group within this entity that presents itself in many different ways and presents many different challenges for these characters that force them to grow, to change, to reveal their true selves and get to the core of who they are. And like you said, it's really nothing short of impressive, you know. And I think that, again, is sort of the trade-off, right? One of the benefits, actually, if anything, of having a shorter cast is you are allowed as an author to really focus in on those specific set of characters without having to worry about, you know, having all of these different moving parts that are going to, you know, like, keeping the plot simple, I think, was really the ultimate benefit for him regarding this series and its characters. We can get into a little bit of, you know, Lord Tenzin and Mei a little bit, right? And sort of how all of that worked as the story, you know, was introduced. Because originally it was like, all right, they're going to show up on this island, and then it's revealed on this island. Oh, wait a minute.
Everything goes to hell. Like, I mean, I had to, you gave me the alley-oop. I had to put it in there. Like, I mean, it's the name is Hell's Paradise. You could have guessed, right? Everything goes wrong. Like, everything goes wrong. I mean, they step foot onto the island, and they're like, damn, we're kind of cooked. That's literally the vibe that it has. And I think with Lord Tenzin, I have kind of mixed feelings when it comes to Tenzin, because I think that they as characters are good, and they definitely are serviceable, but they are probably, like, the antagonistic force in general is probably the weakest aspect of the characters in Hell's Paradise.
Yeah. I'd agree. There's not much to them in comparison to all the other characters.
Like, a lot of it is lore, right? That's kind of where they come in. A lot of their things is, how was the island created? What is Tao? Like, what are they even as creatures? But not a lot of it is super character driven. And that's, like, I'm not super mad at that, because I don't think they're completely bad characters as a result. Like I said, I think they're serviceable. I think they're fine. But it's when you put them up to that same critical lens, you have Gabimaru, Sagiri, Yuzuriha, Gantetsu, Aza, like, all of these other, like, protagonists or sort of, like, people that we are to some extent rooting for, they fall a little bit short. And it's something that it's because, I mean, it's understandable, because you're nailing so many home runs that you're bound to miss, right? You're down to bat out. But it's like, you know, the antagonists do kind of suffer as a result. And I think a lot of it too is because they are basically the only characterized antagonists. Like, you have random monsters and things of that nature, but they are the only main antagonists in the entire series. But they're introduced, I think, like 50 chapters in to a 127 chapter manga. Right. Yeah.
I think it's also because it's more, how do I put this? Not saying that this can't ever be as good as a personal dynamic, but they are really just a force of nature. That's pretty much what they are, right? And like you said, they more so serve as lore. There isn't really this sort of personal conflict versus actually what I would argue one of the other antagonists, Shugen.
Yeah.
Especially regarding a character like Sagiri. I think Shugen is because it's interesting, right? Because when I think of most series, right, like, we'll go back to Naruto, right? If you were to do a list of Naruto's best characters, the top 5 would pretty much be all antagonists, or Sasuke, who's pretty much, like, played an antagonistic.
He's an antagonist for most of the series.
A deuteragonist antagonist. Like, that's what he is. You look at, I think that you could go that for most series. Like, most series top 5, a good majority of that is going to be the protagonist, and the rest is antagonist. And with Hell's Paradise, that's kind of the opposite. Although I don't know if Shugen would be in your top 5 for Hell's Paradise, personally.
Shugen's really good. I don't quite know how I feel about it. He's really good for what we see. It's just, he's another example of, he's introduced, and I mean, we see him earlier in the story, but he comes in like chapter 80 or 90.
Yeah.
And it's like, and listen, in in another story, like in any other shonen almost, that would be fine.
Right,
Like a lot of villain, but the story only goes on after that for 30 some chapters.
Right.
And that just is enough, unless every chapter was focused on Shugen and Shugen alone, which just isn't realistic.
Yeah.
You can't make him, it's really difficult to write him to the caliber of characters that you have been focusing on and slowly building up for the past 80 or 90.
Right. Yeah, it would have been at the expense of a lot of the endings we get with a lot of these other characters. So that I definitely think that's an example of a character done well. But do you think overall Hell's Paradise is a story? Because, for example, the things that it gets linked to, Jujutsu Kaisen's over 200 some chapters, right? Is it in the 300 mark yet? No, it's only like 200.
No, it's only like it's like closing in on 220.
220. Okay, yeah, that's what it. Yeah, JJK is like 220. Chainsaw Man just now is over 100 in part 2. And Chainsaw Man moves crazy fast with its story. Yeah. Do you think a story like Hell's Paradise, if we were to criticize it a little bit, would have benefited a little more if it took a little more time, or do you think the pacing of it was just fine?
So I think, honestly, until the very last like invasion style of arc, I would have zero complaints about the way it's paced. Like literally none. I couldn't nitpick anything if I wanted to.
Right.
Now towards the end, towards that final arc, it's not bad, right? It's not like a complete meltdown. I stand by every main and even like secondary type character we get in the story is handled really well.
Yeah.
Shugen is handled really well.
Right.
Like Lord Tenzin is still handled really well. It's just to a lesser degree. There are some moments that I feel like are somewhat contrived because of the amount of time left, right? It almost feels like there is a self-imposed, I need to end this by this amount of time thing.
Right.
And when I say it could have benefited from a little bit extra time, I really do mean a little bit, because it could have been like maybe 10 chapters.
Yeah.
I don't need something crazy. You could give a few more things that 10 chapters. Like 10 chapters, like just pick it from 127 chapters, 137, and you probably have something that flows a little bit better all the way to the end.
Right.
And that's not even a crazy criticism, because shonen are kind of popular for melting down.
Right,
at the end.
with endings. And it's really sad because usually, we don't know this, at least I didn't know this until afterwards, like with Kubo, pressures from the editors in the magazine, which is a real shame to series that do such numbers for them. But I will say, like, Hell's Paradise in the end, especially, when going back to Gabimaru, the ending was so satisfactory for me. Like, I loved how it ended personally, but I do think some of the other things regarding other characters could have definitely been smoothened out with some more chapters, because, like you said, you can't help but get away from that feeling of, like, at a certain point when reading through it, like, oh yeah, they're trying to end this. It's definitely trying to end this. But regardless, for a story that's, around 120 chapters, if you will, you're talking about, I think, just such a great, well done story. Like, I think Hell's Paradise was able to give me, I sort of describe it as like lightning in a bottle manga, where it's like they're shorter, they feel shorter, although 100 chapters by no way, shape, or form is shorter. But Pluto's one that I would greatly use for this, where it's like these are stories that are capable of getting us invested and really be immersed in so many different characters in a relatively short amount of time, versus series that have been going on for geez knows how long. Like, for example, we'll point to the big three. All three of those series are long as hell. But I could easily argue, although I would still pick Naruto's cast over anything that's been coming out recently, but that's nor here nor there. Hell's Paradise, as a respectable, a very respectable, in my opinion, the best cast in recent shonen for a story that's, for the length that it is.
Yeah, and I mean, it's sort of one of those things where you kind of have to put it into context. Like, if you were to compare Hell's Paradise to something like One Piece, right? Let's say I'm a One Piece fan. Even then, it's kind of hard to compare those two. Okay, you can say One Piece has more good characters, right? Sure, let's go with that.
Right.
But when you look at what it accomplishes in that amount of time, you have to contextualize it. Like, you don't hold a one-shot manga to the same standard you hold Hajime no Ippo.
It's different, very different.
You expect different things. And I will say this: I've read up to chapter, I think it's 400 or 500 of One Piece, right? One Piece did not do in 130 chapters what Hell's Paradise did in 130 chapters.
Yeah, very different pacing. Listen, someone who's I'm only a few chapters behind, but I caught up like not too long ago. I would take a good amount of, like, if I were to take the best of the best, very few One Piece characters go above the best of what Hell's Paradise has, for me personally. And that's not a knock towards One Piece. That's more so praise for Hell's Paradise. But again, I think it's, like you said, it's very different because of the length of the series. And again, One Piece being so plot driven. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. We could go to, for example, Bleach. I think Bleach has a lot of really well done characters, you know? The best of the best being great, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, I think it's a pretty interesting comparison to use because Bleach is a really good cast of characters, but one thing I think it suffers from that Hell's Paradise doesn't is bloat.
Yeah.
There are a lot of
characters in Bleach. Oh my god.
There are a lot of characters that are really good, but there are also a lot of characters that are introduced and then discarded quickly.
Yeah.
Right? That's a writing style.
Yeah.
That's fine. Unless you get caught up in like, now there are some people where I think you could say Kubo just fumbled. Like that was just a bad decision. But I think it's just a style of, hey, I need this character to fulfill this role temporarily. I'm going to get him in, get him out. That's cool. Mm-hmm. And while Kubo succeeds, he gets a lot of bangers because of that. There are a lot of misses, whereas Hell's Paradise is more like, it's conservative, right? It's like, oh no, I'm going to take my time and I'm going to make sure that each character that is introduced is good at the expense of having a lot of good characters. Right. That's kind of how I see it.
Right. Yeah. So I think because of that, it's able to have a concise cast that there's not really much you could, even some of the other characters we didn't touch on, right? Like May and a few others that just, they serve their role super well. And I don't think you could feel, I don't think there's really any character I can think of at the top of my head with Hell's Paradise where I felt completely unsatisfied. There's a few others that we didn't get into just for time's sake because this video is already really long as hell. But I think both of us would agree that when it comes to the best cast in recent Shonen, our pick personally would be Hell's Paradise.
For sure. It's definitely, it's at least up there, and I think everybody that's read this series would probably come to agree based off the standards we've set in this video.
Right. Yeah, the video I did on it, I think almost 2 years ago, that was the main thing I praised it for. I was like, it's the cast. It's the cast of characters.
Really good cast.
You know, it's not this super complex power system. It's not this super complex plot, but it's characters. And that for me is personally what I look forward to the most within a story.
For sure.
But
and I agree. Characters be the best.
Yep. But man, I appreciate you coming on this video. We definitely went at it for a decent amount of time. So
we did.
But for those of you that have not checked out the Broken Ronin, he has done such amazing content on Jujutsu Kaisen, as well as videos on Chainsaw Man, some on Blue Lock, and he's going to also be doing some Hell's Paradise content over on his channel. In fact, he has a video sort of for, you know, getting into Hell's Paradise for beginners. Make sure you go check him out, subscribe, or else. This is